The Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture houses extensive documentation of how enslaved people who worked in close proximity to enslavers, as valets, butlers, and personal servants, had access to information that field workers did not. Information about business dealings, political activities, personal secrets, and crimes that enslavers believed were hidden from observation. On a morning in November 2025, historian Dr. James Richardson opens a package that will lead him to uncover one of the most detailed accounts of this phenomenon he has encountered. The story of a man named Benjamin, who worked as a personal valet to a wealthy plantation owner and politician in Virginia, who over 15 years observed and secretly documented his enslavers' crimes, including fraud, bribery, embezzlement, and involvement in the illegal slave trade after it was banned in 1808, and who after emancipation gave extensive testimony that destroyed his former enslavers' post-war reputation, led to the exposure of crimes that had been hidden for decades, and provided crucial evidence about how political and economic elites in the South engaged in systematic corruption while claiming moral authority, all through knowledge Benjamin gained by being present but supposedly invisible during his years as a valet. The donation comes from a historical society in Virginia that has been researching testimony from formerly enslaved people who worked in positions that gave them access to enslavers' private activities. The letter explains that while examining Freedmen's Bureau records and later court documents from the 1860s, 1870s, researchers discovered extensive testimony from Benjamin documenting his 15 years as a valet to Senator James Caldwell, a prominent Virginia politician, testimony that revealed systematic corruption and crimes, and that led to the posthumous destruction of Caldwell's reputation. James carefully removes the materials from their archival box. The first item is a photograph depicting two men in what appears to be a late 1800s domestic setting. On the left, a black man, likely a servant based on context, stands at a small table, focused downward, carefully arranging cigars inside two wooden boxes. His clothing is neat but simple. White shirt with rolled sleeves and dark vest, suggesting a service role. His posture is attentive and composed, hands delicately handling the cigars. On the right, an older white man sits comfortably in a polished wooden chair, leaning back with an air of entitlement and leisure. He wears a formal black coat and waistcoat, his expression one of complete relaxation. He smokes a cigar with eyes partially closed, exhaling a faint trail of smoke, clearly accustomed to being served. The background shows tall wooden wall panels and a potted plant, hinting at a well-furnished office or private quarters. The contrast between the men's roles, body language, and clothing underscores the hierarchy. One man working quietly and precisely, the other indulging in luxury without exertion. James turns the photograph over. Written on the back in faded ink, "Commemorative photograph, 1880s, representing the relationship between Benjamin, left, and Senator James Caldwell, right." Benjamin worked as Caldwell's personal valet, 1845-1860. During those 15 years, Benjamin was present for private conversations, business dealings, and activities Caldwell believed were hidden. Benjamin observed and secretly documented Caldwell's crimes, including fraud, bribery, and involvement in illegal slave trading. After emancipation and Caldwell's death in 1867, Benjamin gave extensive testimony in 1868-1870 that destroyed Caldwell's reputation and exposed decades of corruption. And below that, in different handwriting, added much later, he was always present, but supposedly invisible. He served cigars, managed correspondence, attended to Caldwell's needs. But he was watching, listening, remembering. For 15 years, he documented everything. After freedom came and Caldwell died, Benjamin testified about everything he had witnessed. The great senator's reputation was destroyed by the testimony of the man who had known him better than anyone, his valet. James reads the inscription 3 times, understanding the profound significance. Benjamin had worked as Senator Caldwell's personal valet for 15 years, had been present during private activities Caldwell believed were secret, had documented what he observed, and had used that documentation after emancipation to give testimony that destroyed Caldwell's posthumous reputation. James spends the rest of that day examining the other materials in the package. What he finds is extraordinary. Benjamin's extensive testimony, given in multiple sessions between 1868-1870, comprising over 200 pages documenting Caldwell's activities. Documentation. Benjamin had secretly kept including dates, names, amounts, and details. Contemporary newspaper accounts from 1868-1870 describing the scandal Benjamin's testimony created, and historical analysis showing how Benjamin's revelations changed understanding of Virginia's antebellum political elite. From Benjamin's testimony, given in Richmond, Virginia, beginning in March 1868, "My name is Benjamin Freeman. I chose the name Freeman after emancipation because it represents freedom from bondage and freedom to finally speak truth about what I witnessed during 15 years as Senator James Caldwell's personal valet. I was born enslaved in Virginia in 1825. When I was approximately 20 years old, in 1845, I was sold to James Caldwell, who was then a wealthy plantation owner and newly elected state legislator. Caldwell purchased me specifically to work as his personal valet, to manage his clothing, attend to his personal needs, serve him during meals and social occasions, and accompany him during his political activities. Working as a personal valet meant I was present during almost every aspect of Caldwell's life. I was in the room during private conversations. I attended political meetings. I managed correspondence. I served drinks and cigars during business dealings. I traveled with Caldwell to Richmond when the legislature was in session. I was present at social events, political gatherings, and private meetings. To white people in Caldwell's circle, I was invisible, just a servant, not a person whose presence mattered or who might observe and understand what was happening. They spoke freely in front of me because they believed enslaved people were incapable of understanding political and business matters, or they simply didn't care if I overheard because they assumed I could never do anything with the information. But I was not invisible to myself. I was watching, listening, and understanding everything, and I was documenting what I witnessed, keeping secret records that I knew would someday be useful for exposing the truth about men like Caldwell, who claimed moral authority while engaging in systematic corruption and crime. I will now describe what I witnessed during 15 years as Caldwell's valet, from 1845 to 1860, when Caldwell sold me because I had become, in his words, too familiar and presumptuous. First, I witnessed systematic bribery in Virginia's legislature. Caldwell served in the state legislature from 1845-1850 and in the state senate from 1850-1860. During this time, he routinely accepted bribes from business interests seeking favorable legislation. I was present during meetings where bribes were negotiated, where money changed hands, where votes were promised in exchange for payment. I documented these bribes in my secret records: dates, amounts, who paid, what legislation was affected. Over 15 years, I documented at least 30 significant bribery transactions involving Caldwell. Second, I witnessed Caldwell's involvement in the illegal slave trade. The importation of enslaved people from Africa was banned by federal law in 1808, but illegal slave trading continued. Caldwell was involved in financing illegal slave trading voyages in the 1840s and 1850s. I was present during meetings where these operations were discussed and financed. I documented names, dates, and details of at least 5 illegal slave trading ventures that Caldwell helped finance. Third, I witnessed systematic fraud in Caldwell's business dealings. Caldwell owned multiple plantations and businesses. He routinely engaged in fraud, falsifying records, cheating business partners, evading taxes, and using his political position to gain unfair advantages. I documented dozens of instances of fraud over 15 years. Fourth, I witnessed Caldwell's personal crimes, including sexual violence against enslaved women. Caldwell routinely raped enslaved women on his plantations. I documented at least 12 women who were subjected to repeated sexual violence by Caldwell. I also documented several children born as a result of these rapes. I kept all these observations in secret records. I developed a system of shorthand that only I could read. I hid my records in places Caldwell would never look. I added to my records regularly, documenting dates, names, amounts, and details of everything significant I witnessed. I kept these records because I believed that someday slavery would end, and there would be opportunity to expose the crimes of men like Caldwell. I wanted documentation to support my testimony, so that when I finally spoke, my words would be believed. In 1860, Caldwell sold me. He said I had become too familiar and presumptuous. I believe he sensed that I understood too much and was observing too closely. I was sold to a plantation owner in Georgia, where I remained enslaved until emancipation in 1865. When freedom came, I retrieved my hidden records from where I had concealed them before being sold. I returned to Virginia with the specific intention of exposing Caldwell's crimes. I learned that Caldwell had died in 1867. He died before I could confront him with what I knew. But his death did not prevent me from exposing his crimes. In fact, it made my testimony easier because Caldwell could not defend himself or retaliate. Beginning in 1868, I gave extensive testimony to various authorities: the Freedmen's Bureau, federal investigators, newspaper reporters, and later to historians, documenting everything I had witnessed during my 15 years as Caldwell's valet. I provided my secret records as evidence. I named names, provided dates and amounts, described specific criminal acts in detail. My testimony created enormous scandal. Caldwell had been considered a respected statesman, a moral leader, a defender of Virginia's interests. My testimony revealed him as a corrupt politician who accepted bribes, who financed illegal slave trading, who engaged in systematic fraud, and who routinely raped enslaved women. Many people initially refused to believe my testimony. They could not accept that a prominent senator could be so thoroughly corrupt, or they simply rejected testimony from a formerly enslaved black man against a white political leader. But I had documentation. I had dates, names, amounts, details that could be verified. As investigators examined my records and confirmed details, my testimony gained credibility. Over the next several years, from 1868 to 1870, my testimony led to multiple revelations that destroyed Caldwell's posthumous reputation. Newspapers published exposés based on my testimony. Historians investigating Virginia's antebellum political system cited my records as evidence of systematic corruption. Caldwell's family was socially ostracized. His statues were removed. His name was struck from institutions that had honored him. I am giving this testimony because I want several things documented. First, I want the historical record to show that enslaved people who worked as personal servants had access to information that field workers did not. We were present during private conversations, business dealings, and political activities. We observed and understood what was happening, even though enslavers believed we were invisible or incapable of understanding. Second, I want to document that some enslaved people kept secret records of what they witnessed. This was extremely dangerous. If my records had been discovered, I would have been severely punished or killed. But I kept them because I believed documentation would be crucial for eventually exposing the truth. Third, I want people to understand that Southern political and economic elites who claimed moral authority were often deeply corrupt. Caldwell was a senator, a wealthy plantation owner, a supposedly respectable gentleman. But he accepted bribes, financed illegal slave trading, engaged in fraud, and raped enslaved women. My testimony exposed this corruption. Fourth, I want to document that post-emancipation testimony from formerly enslaved people, when supported by detailed records, could destroy even the most powerful reputations. Caldwell died believing his reputation was secure. My testimony, delivered after his death but supported by 15 years of secret documentation, destroyed that reputation completely. Finally, I want to honor the women Caldwell raped, the people victimized by his corruption, and all those who suffered from the crimes of men who hid behind respectability and political power. My testimony gave voice to their suffering and exposed crimes that Caldwell believed would remain hidden forever. I kept records for 15 years. I survived being sold away. I preserved my documentation. After emancipation, I used those records to give testimony that destroyed the reputation of one of Virginia's most powerful men. That is my contribution to ensuring that truth about slavery and corruption is documented, and that crimes, even when committed by the powerful, are eventually exposed. James reads Benjamin's testimony multiple times, struck by his methodical documentation over 15 years, his preservation of records despite being sold away, and his strategic use of that documentation after emancipation to destroy Caldwell's reputation. James contacts Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a historian at the University of Virginia, who specializes in political corruption in antebellum Virginia, and testimony from formerly enslaved people about elite corruption. Rebecca has spent years researching how enslaved personal servants had unique access to information about their enslavers' activities. Rebecca calls him back immediately. Benjamin's testimony, if he provided over 200 pages of documented accounts supported by secret records he kept for 15 years, would be one of the most important sources we have about political corruption in antebellum Virginia. Personal valets were uniquely positioned to witness private activities, but most couldn't document them or didn't survive to testify. Benjamin's case is extraordinary. Send me everything. James shares all materials with Rebecca. They arranged to meet at the Virginia Historical Society to examine any additional records about Senator Caldwell, Benjamin's testimony, and the scandal it created. Over the following weeks, James and Rebecca verify Benjamin's testimony through multiple sources. They find newspaper accounts from 1868, 1870, confirming that Benjamin gave extensive testimony about Senator Caldwell, and that his testimony created major scandal. From the Richmond Examiner, June 1868. Damning testimony against late Senator. A Negro man named Benjamin, who formerly worked as Senator James Caldwell's personal valet, has given extensive testimony, making shocking allegations about Caldwell's activities during his years in the legislature and Senate. Benjamin claims to have kept detailed records over 15 years, documenting bribery, fraud, illegal slave trading, and personal crimes. While many initially dismissed Benjamin's testimony, investigators who have examined his records report that many details can be verified. The allegations, if true, would completely destroy Caldwell's reputation as a statesman and moral leader. The Caldwell family has denounced Benjamin's testimony as lies motivated by revenge. They find that as Benjamin's testimony was investigated and details were verified, Caldwell's reputation was indeed destroyed. From a newspaper account in 1870, Caldwell Legacy in Ruins. Following 2 years of revelations based on testimony from Caldwell's former valet Benjamin, the late senator's reputation has been completely destroyed. Evidence has confirmed many of Benjamin's allegations about bribery and fraud. The Caldwell family has withdrawn from public life. Institutions bearing Caldwell's name have removed his name. What was once considered a distinguished legacy of public service is now recognized as a career built on corruption. They find that Benjamin's testimony was recognized as particularly valuable because of his detailed documentation. Historians and investigators cited his records as crucial evidence about how Virginia's political elite operated. They also find information about Benjamin's life after his testimony. From records, they find that Benjamin worked as a teacher in Virginia for formerly enslaved people, helping others learn to read and write. He continued to give testimony and to educate people about slavery and corruption. He died in 1895 at age 70, having spent nearly 30 years after emancipation ensuring that truth was documented. Over the following months, James and Rebecca worked to create an exhibition examining Benjamin's testimony within the broader context of how enslaved personal servants had unique access to information about elite corruption and how some used that knowledge after emancipation to expose crimes. 28 months after James first opened that package, the Smithsonian opens the exhibition, The Valet Who Knew Everything, Benjamin's Documentation of Elite Corruption. The exhibition occupies a gallery designed to examine how enslaved people in service positions had access to information others didn't, how some documented what they witnessed despite risks, and how post-emancipation testimony destroyed reputations of the powerful. The centerpiece is the commemorative photograph showing Benjamin carefully managing cigars while Senator Caldwell relaxes, smoking, a scene that captures both the service relationship and Benjamin's proximity to Caldwell's private activities. A detailed explanation accompanies the image. This photograph from the 1880s commemorates Benjamin's 15 years, 1845-1860, as personal valet to Virginia Senator James Caldwell. As a valet, Benjamin was present during private conversations, political meetings, and business dealings. He secretly documented Caldwell's crimes, including bribery, fraud, illegal slave trading, and sexual violence. After emancipation and Caldwell's death in 1867, Benjamin gave over 200 pages of testimony supported by his detailed records, destroying Caldwell's reputation and exposing systematic corruption among Virginia's political elite. The photograph shows Benjamin in his service role, present but supposedly invisible, while Caldwell relaxes, unaware that Benjamin was documenting everything. The exhibition presents Benjamin's complete testimony, his preserved records, and documentation of the scandal his revelations created. The exhibition shows how Benjamin methodically documented crimes over 15 years, and how his testimony, supported by detailed records, destroyed even a powerful senator's reputation. One section examines the role of personal servants and valets, showing how they had access to information that field workers did not. They were present during private conversations, observed business dealings, and witnessed activities enslavers believed were hidden. Another section documents Benjamin's secret record-keeping over 15 years, explaining his shorthand system, how he hid records, and how he preserved them even after being sold away in 1860. The exhibition presents specific examples of what Benjamin documented: bribery transactions with dates and amounts, illegal slave trading ventures, fraud schemes, and crimes against enslaved women, showing the extraordinary detail of his records. A section on the testimony's impact displays newspaper coverage from 1868-1870, showing how Benjamin's revelations created scandal and how verification of his claims destroyed Caldwell's reputation. The exhibition examines why Benjamin's testimony was so effective. It was detailed. It was documented. It named specific names and amounts, and it could be verified. This made it impossible to dismiss as unreliable or motivated solely by revenge. A section on broader significance explains that Benjamin's case was not unique. Other enslaved personal servants also observed elite corruption, and some gave similar testimony after emancipation. But Benjamin's case is one of the most thoroughly documented. The exhibition traces Benjamin's post-testimony life as a teacher and continued advocate for documenting truth about slavery and corruption. A video features historians discussing Benjamin's testimony, examining political corruption in antebellum Virginia, and reflecting on how formerly enslaved people's testimony exposed truths that elites had hidden. On opening day, James stands watching visitors engage with the exhibition. He sees people study the photograph, understanding that Benjamin's service role gave him access to observe everything while being treated as invisible. Rebecca stands beside him. "Benjamin worked as Caldwell's valet for 15 years, she says. He was present during private conversations, political meetings, business dealings. Caldwell and others spoke freely because they believed Benjamin was incapable of understanding, or that his presence didn't matter. But Benjamin was documenting everything. After emancipation, his testimony destroyed Caldwell's reputation. A man who died thinking his legacy was secure had that legacy completely destroyed by testimony from the valet he had treated as invisible." A young black man approaches after reading Benjamin's testimony. "Benjamin kept secret records for 15 years, knowing discovery meant death," he says. "He preserved those records even after being sold. Then after freedom, he used them to expose a senator's crimes." That's extraordinary strategic thinking. Documenting evidence over 15 years, preserving it through being sold, then using it to destroy his former enslaver's reputation. That's resistance through documentation and patience. An elderly woman stops at the section showing Benjamin's records. "The detail is remarkable," she says. "Dates, names, amounts, specific descriptions. Benjamin wasn't just observing. He was methodically documenting like an investigator building a case. and his documentation was so detailed it could be verified, which made his testimony undeniable. A political historian examines the section on bribery. Benjamin documented at least 30 bribery transactions, he says. He recorded who paid, how much, what legislation was affected. This is crucial evidence about how political corruption actually operated in antebellum Virginia. Without Benjamin's testimony, much of this corruption would have remained hidden. Throughout the day, visitors engage deeply with the exhibition, understanding that Benjamin's story represents how enslaved people in service positions sometimes had unique access to information, and how some used that knowledge after emancipation to expose truths that the powerful had believed would remain hidden forever. As the museum prepares to close, James walks through the gallery one more time. He stops in front of the photograph, seeing Benjamin's careful attention to his task, while Caldwell relaxes, completely unaware that the man serving him was documenting everything. He thinks about Benjamin's life, born enslaved in 1825, sold to Senator Caldwell in 1845, working as personal valet for 15 years, present during private activities Caldwell believed were secretly documenting crimes over 15 years, sold away in 1860, surviving to emancipation in 1865, retrieving his hidden records, learning Caldwell had died in 1867, beginning testimony in 1868, spending 2 years giving detailed accounts that destroyed Caldwell's reputation, working as a teacher for decades, dying in 1895, having ensured his testimony was preserved. He thinks about the power of documentation, Benjamin's secret records covering 15 years, his preservation of evidence despite being sold away, his strategic use of that documentation after emancipation to destroy the reputation of one of Virginia's most powerful men. And he thinks about what Benjamin's testimony revealed: systematic bribery, illegal slave trading, fraud, sexual violence, all hidden behind claims of respectability and moral authority, all exposed by the testimony of the man who had been treated as invisible while observing everything. The photograph waited approximately 140 years to tell Benjamin's complete story. The image that shows a valet carefully managing cigars while a senator relaxes has become testimony to how enslaved personal servants had access to information about elite corruption, how some documented what they witnessed despite enormous risks, and how post-emancipation testimony supported by detailed records could destroy even the most powerful reputations by exposing truths that had been hidden behind claims of respectability. Now the photograph and exhibition have fulfilled the purpose Benjamin intended when he kept secret records for 15 years. The truth about elite corruption has been documented and preserved. A powerful senator's crimes have been exposed despite his death, before testimony could be given. And future generations can understand that enslaved people who were treated as invisible were often the most observant witnesses to crimes that the powerful believed would remain hidden forever. Benjamin Freeman, personal valet, 1845-1860, secret documentarian of Senator James Caldwell's crimes, preserver of evidence through being sold away, post-emancipation witness whose detailed testimony destroyed a powerful reputation, teacher and advocate for truth. His story has been told, his strategic documentation has been honored, and his legacy lives on as proof that patience, observation, careful record-keeping, and determination to expose truth could eventually bring justice even against the most powerful, transforming the knowledge of a supposedly invisible servant into evidence that destroyed a senator's legacy and exposed systematic corruption that had been hidden behind respectability for decades.